Well, good evening, my lovely lilies. And tonight, I have something very interesting for you. I was sent this true story by an anonymous, entitled The Witch of the Mexican Hills. So, without further ado, close the blinds, dim those lights, cuddle under your favorite blanket, and let's begin. This happened many years ago when I was a little girl. I need to explain a little before I get into the actual phenomena. I grew up in a small farming town, roughly 1 hour's drive from Monterrey in northern Mexico. My father was an orange farmer, and this is where I spent my years before schooling. Because my father worked very long days, I was looked after by my grandmother. She would teach me to read, tie my shoelaces, make things, etc. But my endearing memory of her was the story she told. She always told me never to stray from the farm and never, ever play in the hills above the farm. She would never explain why, but the local stories told that a number of children had gone out playing there and had not returned. I always figured it was just one of those stories to warn other children, especially me, to stay away because there are hidden caves and the ground can open up without warning. Earthquakes often revealed hidden caves. One night, when I was very young, one of my earliest memories, in fact, it was very late in the summer, and it gets chilly in the mountains of Mexico. And I was up later than I usually should be staying up. I was dozing by the fire, my grandmother and my mother just talking to one another, when I heard a commotion outside. I jolted awake because it was a harsh shouting and rushing that just came from nowhere. It was my father and his farm hands. They ran into the house and bolted the doors and closed the shutters on our windows. My father, seeing I was still awake, quickly motioned to my grandmother to take me to bed. Our farmhouse was small, so I shared a room with my grandmother, but she always stayed up after I went to bed. She tucked me in, locked the bedroom door, and closed the shutters. I used to sleep with the windows open to see the stars, but she calmly told me, not tonight. I remember falling asleep, hearing my father, my mother, and his farmhands whispering in the next room. But I couldn't make it out. I was very sleepy. I thought no more of it, and when I didn't get answers in the morning, I just dropped the subject, thinking it was coyotes or something. Like I said, this was before schooling. Shortly after this, my grandmother moved closer into the town, and I moved with her, so I was closer to my primary school. It was arranged. On varying weekends, my mother would visit me, and my grandmother. And on every other weekend, we would stay at the farm. I always remember my father, who was always caring and loving, always told me I should not come back to visit. I would get upset at this, and always remember my grandmother saying, "Do not worry, she is safe for 2 days." It always puzzled me, and my father would apologize, saying he didn't mean I was bad, but the farm wasn't a good place for a little girl. My mother always told me off as well, but half-heartedly, like she somewhat agreed. Okay, this is where things get a little weirder. When I was at school one day, playing with my new friends, one of the girls started singing a rhyme, about a boy eaten by a witch. Then another girl started talking about how her uncle had seen a witch in the hills near the town. The hills my father's orange farm was in. So I asked a little more, as my curiosity was piqued by this point. The girl explained that a witch lived in the hills and would kidnap and kill children to prolong her own life. I wish I hadn't asked, as it scared me a little. When I remembered the night, just a few weeks earlier, when my father and the farmhands had locked down our house, I put it out of my mind. A week or so later, it was our turn to stay at the farm. When we arrived, I decided to go for a walk among the orange trees, which I often did. And as a matter of fact, my grandmother said, "Okay, don't stray from the farm." It didn't register, and I kept walking and humming to myself. Before I knew it, I was on the edge of the farm, looking at the rocky and bushy hillside. My mind started to play with the idea of playing there. As I thought it, I heard a distant voice call, "Nina, Nina," which means little girl in Spanish. I thought I was imagining it, so I glanced around, and then I saw her. A woman. She was on the hillside, maybe 30 meters up. She stood on a rock, waving me toward her. She had very strange clothes, all black and looking almost like feathers. And her smile, more like a grimace, was very stretched and looked black, like all her teeth were black. But scariest of all were her eyes, jet black. I didn't look at them, but they filled me with terror and dread. She called again, knowing I had seen her. "Nina, come here. Come help me." I didn't want to engage with her, but found myself shaking my head and becoming even more scared. When I didn't move, she called again, saying, "I have something for you. Would you like to see it?" Again, I found myself shaking my head at her. She started slowly stepping toward me, saying, "Look, it is right here. Come see." But every step she took nearer, I took a step further back. Then she got very impatient, saying, "Listen to your seniors. Come here now." Her voice changed and became very gravelly. Then her face changed, and it became almost distorted, as she barked at me to come to her. I couldn't take any more and ran as fast as I could to the house. I never looked back. The run seemed to take forever, but it was maybe only a minute or two. When I got to the house, my grandmother could see something was wrong, and I burst out crying and told her everything. She never doubted me for a moment and held me until my father got home that night. She said not to tell him, and that she would speak with him. All she said when he came home was, "We won't be coming here anymore." In the years that followed, I buried it. My father eventually sold the farm, and has since died. He never discussed that day, or the day he rushed in. My grandmother, too, has since passed. Though my mother is still alive, she doesn't talk about our years at the farm, and only says, "The place was unhappy for me." I only told my husband of nearly 3 decades last year, and he fully believed me. That made telling others easier, though some were still harshly dismissive. It has since been easier to tell people, There have been many sightings of witches in Mexico in recent years. Growing up, I thought it was just me and a few others. Since I moved away from Mexico decades ago, I haven't returned, and I do not want to. Just recalling this event makes me a little nervous. I did ask around the small town when I was still young, but nobody would say anything, or they were just dismissive. Alright, my lovely lilies, thank you so much for watching the new video. If you can, hit that subscribe and like button, comment below and tell me your thoughts. Also, don't forget to tap the little notification bell so you're always in the know on this channel. As well, guys, you can always find me on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and always you can hit me up in my emails. Feel free to send me your stories, whether they're fiction or totally true. I'm always up for some great stories. And oh, by the way, until next time, sweet dreams.